Hi, I'm Rebecca White and I'm an EAP teacher at Imperial College London. Today I'm answering the question, does Grammarly do what it says on the tin? And behind this jokey title is a serious question. We as EAP practitioners are constantly evaluating or questioning the effectiveness of what we do. I want to apply that same professional accountability or responsibility to Grammarly, which is a piece of software that is currently a trend in higher education, to link to that conference theme. 1,600 members of my institution currently have Grammarly membership. Higher education institutions are promoting Grammarly on their website to help improve their students' academic writing. And with the obvious overlap with our profession, I wanted to take a look at what it does and how effectively it works on our students' texts. So let's take a look at what Grammarly is, what it says it does on the tin, rather. So it says that it helps writers to compose bold, clear, mistake-free writing. These are the things that it focuses on. So you can see there's a lot of overlap with what we focus on in our profession. It can be used as a plugin across the web, on various platforms across the web. But today I'm looking at how it is used in Microsoft Word, because that's where a lot of our students do their academic writing. So just to give you a bit of context, so I teach doctoral students at Imperial College London, which is an institution that specialises in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or medicine, or STEM. And I teach a research writing course for doctoral students who have already done two 8-week academic writing courses with us and are still not improving, or still have not improved to the level required for doctoral study. And so these students tend not to notice the issues in their writing. And so thinking about how I could wean them off our support, or how I could empower them to continue improving their academic writing beyond the course, I looked at Grammarly because I thought it might help them to notice the issues in their writing so that they can then work on eliminating them one by one. So I turned to the literature, and there was a small body of literature that found that Grammarly could help eliminate writing in EFL texts, but at a level much lower than that for my students. So I thought, okay, I need to test it. I need to see whether it is indeed effective before I prepare my students to use it. I was also skeptical that Grammarly would have the disciplinary understanding of texts in my students' field in order to be able to help them, because I've been working with STEM students for the past almost 7 years. I've developed an understanding of STEM writing across those years, and I apply that whenever I work with a student to improve their writing. And I did wonder, how can Grammarly do the same if it doesn't have that same fine understanding of disciplinary norms? So I went about testing what Grammarly does to our students' texts, and I'm going to share with you today what I found. I should add that even though I'm looking at STEM writing, I do encourage teachers of specializing in EAP for arts, humanities, social sciences, business, other disciplines, to think about how what I found here might relate to their discipline, or how it could be viewed through their own disciplinary lens. So I'm going to look at two things today. First of all, we're going to have a quick look at the scale of difference between Grammarly's output and my output of a student text, just to see the scale of difference. And then we're going to be looking at reasons for this difference. So how is Grammarly approaching a student text that differs from how an EAP teacher would approach a student text? And I'm going to share my observations from looking at 24 student texts produced by my doctoral students. So first of all, let's have a look at the scale of difference. So I looked at 2 students' texts, which I selected randomly out of the 24. I did an error analysis following Alison Barkhuizen's method, and then I compared that analysis to Grammarly's output. So let's take a look. I should say first, Grammarly Premium has these settings that you can set. So these were the settings that I selected. Okay, so let's take a look at my first student's text. So here you can see what I identified as being issues for my student were mainly vocabulary and article use. These were the priorities for this student. These are the things they needed to address in order to really improve their text, to make it clearer. And then there were a few other grammatical issues. Here were the things that Grammarly thought were important. And where it's red, that's where Grammarly's analysis didn't align with my own. So where I felt that it would not help the student's text to point this out, either because it wouldn't improve their text or because it would make it worse. So maybe cases where Grammarly has misinterpreted the student's text. And where it's green is where Grammarly has agreed with me, where they've picked up on the same thing that I've picked up on, or where they've picked up on something that I hadn't picked up on, but that I agree with. So we can see that there's a large discrepancy. Let's take a look at student 2. So I found that with this student, there was again, vocabulary was a priority. Also cohesion was a real issue for this student. And the student needed to address these cohesion issues in order to improve their text. Interestingly, Grammarly really didn't pick up on these issues in any great way. They did pick up on all 7 of the article use issues that I did. And what's really interesting is that Grammarly identified 12 passive voice issues where I didn't feel there were any. And same goes with conciseness and clarity. So the things that Grammarly are flagging as priorities are all things that I didn't agree with, and all the things that I flagged as priorities were things that Grammarly didn't really pick up on, with the exception of article use. So hopefully that gives you a picture of the difference between my analysis as an EAP teacher and Grammarly's analysis. I should acknowledge, of course, that there will always be discrepancies between EAP teachers. That's natural, that's been shown in the literature. But what's important here is the extent of the discrepancy. There's really not much overlap between my analysis and Grammarly's. So moving on to part 2 of this talk, why are there these differences between my analysis and Grammarly's? That's what I wanted to know. And to do that, I looked at, as I said, 24 of my students' text. I looked at Grammarly's output, and I focused on the areas where I didn't agree with Grammarly's analysis. And I felt that it would either it wasn't helpful for the student to point these things out, or I felt that Grammarly's analysis it had misunderstood the student's text and its suggestions would make the text worse. And I came up with, so I looked at it and I thought, how is Grammarly approaching the student's text differently from how I'm approaching it? And I came up with these 5 ways in which it differs from an EAP teacher, leading to different outputs. So I'm going to look at these one by one, and we're going to look at some examples. First of all, it doesn't always analyze sentence structure accurately. That's partly just because it's AI, and so it has more difficulty in doing that than a human. But also sometimes our students, because they're non-native speakers, they might make errors or native speakers could as well, of course, that they're errors that make it more difficult to understand the structure of the sentence. And I think as humans, we can't always work it out, but I think we're still better at doing that than AI is. So I'm going to give a couple of examples to illustrate my point. Okay, in this example, we've got our verb is, and we can clearly see that the subject of the verb is applications, one of the applications. However, Grammarly has misinterpreted the structure of the sentence, and it sees the subject as being the noun thanks, or the word thanks, which comes earlier in the sentence. So it's taken this perfectly good sentence and has suggested this change in verb form to are. So it's made a suggestion that could actually make this text worse. And this is concerning because I think there would be students who would indiscriminately just go through and accept all of Grammarly's suggestions, either because they're time poor or because maybe they defer to Grammarly, they believe Grammarly's ground claims and they don't have trust in their own understanding of English grammar. And so if a student is going through indiscriminately accepting changes, then they could end up with a text that is much worse than the one to begin with. So that's one example of grammarly misinterpreting sentence structure. Here's another one. So as an EAP teacher, I would look at this sentence and I would say to the student that they need to change the word although for the word however to make it more grammatically accurate. Because the student has used although in this way, this has led Grammarly to misinterpret the structure of the sentence, leading to a suggestion which actually makes the sentence less clear. So here they've suggested putting a comma before they, which would just change the meaning of the sentence further or distort the meaning further because of that initial error, which led Grammarly to misinterpret the structure. Okay, it also applies prescriptive grammar rules, which are obviously problematic. And there are two main ones. So the first one is it doesn't like the passive voice. So in this sentence, which is a perfectly good sentence, it is suggesting that the sentence be rewritten in the active voice. Now, obviously, sometimes it might be desirable to use the active rather than the passive, but as EAP teachers, this is a choice that we would make, or a judgment we would make based on the wider text, so how the sentence fits into the wider text, what the meaning of the sentence is. It's not something that we would just apply as a blanket rule. And here the use of the passive voice is not only appropriate, but it's actually more appropriate than the active voice. So say the student said chemical inhibitors are small chemical compounds which we use as a drug treatment. That we is not clear. Do they mean we as a research group, or do they mean we as the research community or the medical community? So that's a case where the active voice is preferable, it's more desirable, and there are plenty of cases of that in academic writing. So this blanket rule is quite potentially dangerous if students take it literally. The other prescriptive rule that it applies is this rule that defining relative clauses should use that and non-defining relative clauses should use which. This rule is contested, so I don't think the student should be worrying about this. As an EAP teacher, I prioritize which areas the student should be focusing on so that in order to make their text as clear as possible. Here, this is a perfectly good sentence. Most people would think that this sentence is perfectly acceptable. And my worry is that the student might get frustrated that they don't understand this error, and they might spend a lot of time going away and reading about relative clauses, and that's time they could be spending on understanding errors which actually do impact meaning. Okay, Grammarly is also not good at using context to judge accuracy. And again, that is something that we do as EAP specialists. We think about the genre of the text, we think about the argument the student is trying to make, we think about how a sentence fits into the wider paragraph. Grammarly doesn't do that quite as well. So here's an example of where, again, a perfectly good sentence, but Grammarly is saying oil is an uncountable noun and therefore you can't use with it. And in general, everyday language, oil is an uncountable noun. But in this student's discipline, it can be used countably. You can talk about different oils, different types of oil, one oil compared to another oil. And so this is a case where, as a teacher with that discipline, that sensitivity to disciplinary norms, I look at that and I can see that it's acceptable. But Grammarly doesn't yet have that same understanding of context to be able to do that. And so again, if the student accepted it, this suggestion, they would actually make their sentence worse. And this is an interesting example of a grammatical error that Grammarly didn't pick up on. And I think this may be because, so it's obviously should be were died prematurely, rather than were premature death. And I wonder if Grammarly didn't pick up on it because here we have a verb, adjective, noun, and that structure is correct. It's just that we understand it's incorrect because we understand the wider sentence. So I'm wondering if Grammarly's inability to understand and take into account the rest of the sentence might have meant it couldn't pick up on that. I should note that Grammarly does sometimes do that. It can look at the wider context and use that to give suggestions, but it doesn't always do that. And this is a case where it hasn't done that. Okay, Grammarly believes in synonyms. And the reason why I framed it like this is because in EAP, we often say that synonyms don't exist. There is no such thing as a synonym. So in this sense, we don't believe in synonyms, whereas Grammarly does believe in synonyms, and it believes in them fervently. And I'm going to give some examples. So here is a sentence, and Grammarly has picked up on the word effective and has said that it is overused and has suggested sufficient as a substitution. Obviously, this is quite worrying because effective and sufficient do not mean the same thing. And if the student accepted this suggestion, they would change the meaning of their sentence. If something is not effective, it means it doesn't work. If something is sufficient, it means it's not enough. And so the sentence has completely changed if the student accept this change. And there's also a question as to why Grammarly thinks that overused words are a problem, or words that are widely used are a problem. Effective is a widely used word in academic writing because a lot of academic writing does discuss the effectiveness of something. It might test the effectiveness of a research method or a tool, piece of software. And so that's why it's widely used. And to tell a student that they shouldn't use these useful, widely used words that they need to be using just doesn't make sense, and it's quite concerning. And here we have another example. So Grammarly thinks that important is overused and the student should substitute it with essential. Obviously, again, this changes the meaning of the sentence because essential is much stronger than important. And maybe the student doesn't mean that it's essential. And again, it's introducing a notion that as a field of EAP, I don't think we believe, and we don't believe that students should be avoiding overused words. Because the overused words are often the useful ones that they need to be using. We can look at the academic word list as an example of that. Finally, it values conciseness over precision, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So Grammarly has looked at this word, or this phrase, are able to, and has said that it's too wordy. It should replace are able to with can. This is a problem again because can has two meanings. Can refer to ability, or it can refer to possibility. So to say that the student should replace are able to with can, that would actually make the meaning less clear. In fact, I would do the opposite to Grammarly. If the student had put can here, I would suggest that they either change it to are able to or maybe able to, so make that meaning clearer. So Grammarly really values conciseness. And here's another example. So in addition, again, a very useful linking word, it has suggested, because it's too wordy, using also or besides. Obviously, there are problems with style here. Style or register, also and besides, are not commonly used terms in words in academic writing. But also, they're not used in the same way. So substituting in addition for one of these words would be problematic. So to answer my original question, does Grammarly do what it says on the tin? I would say that in some cases, yes, it can do what it says on the tin, but even then not consistently. And in many cases, it does not do what it says on the tin. And actually, it can do the opposite. It can make a writer's text worse. So to conclude, I have some questions for us that I want us to consider in the Q&A. And I'll attempt to answer them myself here as well. First of all, why do we strive for grammatical accuracy? I would argue that we strive for grammatical accuracy not because it's inherently good in itself, but because it can help improve the clarity of a text. And that's the place we should be starting from, is improving the clarity of a text, not making it as grammatically accurate as possible, which is what Grammarly is trying to do. And the result is it's sometimes, or often even, making the text less clear and losing the original meaning. Secondly, how do we as a field respond to Grammarly and similar software? So we as experts in academic discourse have something to say about Grammarly and how it works. And I think we should be passing this on to other members of our institutions that might speak to students about their academic writing. So that might be the library, that might be people in departments, GTAs, lecturers. I think that it is our responsibility to make it clear how effective Grammarly is on student texts, and in particular that students should be wary of accepting its suggestions. And finally, I'd like to think what can be gained from further research into such software. This has been a very small step forward into gaining an understanding. I would encourage colleagues from who specialize in other disciplines such as arts, humanities and social sciences, business, to conduct similar analyses so that we as a field can take an informed stance on Grammarly and its use on academic writing within the disciplines. So I look forward to discussing these with you at the Q&A. Thank you.